Okay, so on that note, we will go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to this event for today. We're going to look at stress and Alzheimer's disease from the individual to the caregiver. And so today's event is the fifth in a series of educational programs that are a result of collaborations between multiple groups at Morgan State University and Johns Hopkins University. So together, these programs are designed, one, to increase community awareness on topics related to aging, Alzheimer's disease, and related dementias. Two, to provide information about treatments for individuals with memory loss. Three, to help highlight the importance of diverse participation in research. And four, to allow a platform for open discussion and engagement around these topics. So there'll be two parts to today's event. We will start with two presentations on the topic of stress in the context of aging, Alzheimer's disease, and related dementias. So the first presentation will be on the topic of caregiving, presented by Ms. Dawnita Brown. And then we'll have a second presentation which will discuss the role of life stressors on late life cognition and dementia risk. And this presentation will be given by Dr. Sarah Forrester, who I'll introduce later. And then following these presentations, we'll have a wonderful panel discussion that will be moderated by Reverend Dr. Alvin Hathaway Sr. And this will include an opportunity for the audience to ask questions. So before diving into our first presentation, I would like to acknowledge our event organizers. So this event is presented by Morgan State University, the RCMI program, which stands for Research Centers in Minority Institutions, a program which funds the Center for Urban Health Disparities Research and Innovation. It's also presented by Ascend program, which is a student-centered entrepreneurial development program, and then also by the newly established Center for Brain Health Research. This event is co-sponsored by Morgan Cares, the community engagement core of the Center for Urban Health Disparities Research and Innovation, and also by Johns Hopkins Alzheimer's Disease Research Center and the Johns Hopkins Alzheimer's Disease Resource Center for Minority Aging Research. So for our audience members, just a note that throughout the session, please put any questions you may have in the chat box, or you can save them until the end of the presentation. And also a reminder to keep your microphone muted during the presentation and panel discussion. So I'd like to get right into it and introduce our first speaker, Ms. Dawnita Brown. So Ms. Dawnita Brown is the founder and CEO of Hey Caregiver, a lifestyle brand that educates, equips, and encourages Black family caregivers to live a life of self-fullness during their caregiving journey. She defines this as the sweet spot between selfish and selfless. Ms. Brown is also founder of the Binti Circle, a nationwide intergenerational supportive network for Black daughters who are caring or who have cared for their parents. She is additionally host of the Selfful Caregiver podcast, combining her personal caregiving experience with education. Ms. Brown became a certified caregiving consultant, educator, and facilitator in 2021. So Ms. Brown envisions a community of holistically well caregivers, including mind, body, and spirit. So we're very thrilled to have her speaking with us today and to give us a perspective of the caregiver. So welcome, Ms. Brown.
Thank you for having me. I am glad to be here. Before we get started, I'd like you guys to answer this question that whether you're a caregiver or not, I think it's applicable, but it also dates me because these movies are pretty old. Some people may not even know what movies they are. So I just want you to select which movie best describes how you have dealt with stress over the past week. Okay. This is interesting. We have to work on our sleep, y'all. Okay, responses are still coming in. Okay. I'm not sure. Can I leave the poll open or?
Sure. I can
Okay.
whenever I can end it. I don't know if it's going to stay on the screen or not, but
Okay, awesome. Well, I think we have quite a few. I'm gonna use this later, so I'm gonna screenshot it. Okay. Thank you. Thank you all for your participation. All right. I'm gonna share my screen. Give me once. Dr. Hathaway, I'm with you on the technology. But we are going to get it together. All right. Okay. Let's do this again. Oops. Bear with me 1 second. Okay, here we go. Got it. I thought I had it. Okay, I'm psycho right now.
I think you can just click present right there under copy link.
Where that? Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. Thank you. All right.
Perfect.
So great. Here we go. So you guys, I am presenting today on caregiving, the self-will approach, and Valerie did a wonderful job with introducing me, so I won't go through that again because we want to make sure that we get to the nitty-gritty. But this is me and my mom. The self-will approach is how to take care of you better so you can take care of your caree. Let's see. So we discussed who I am, but a little more about me is that I also founded a girls organization when I was serving in the Peace Corps called Black Girls Global Exchange. And so we're still doing that. I am a former employee wellness coordinator for Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which I did prior to joining the Peace Corps. And you guys know that I am certified caregiving consultant. So this is me. In 2016, I had just arrived it was Swaziland at that time. It's now Eswatini in the southern part of Africa. It's the smallest country on the continent. And I was just in my glory. So I did not want to come back. As I mentioned, I was working at Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So I was a federal employee. And I really wanted to transition from being a Peace Corps volunteer to a Peace Corps employee. I was a community health volunteer. Well, as I was closing my service out in 2018, I learned on a phone call with my dad that my mom was on life support in Baltimore, Maryland. So that was August 5th, 2018. And I came home. I thought that I was only going to be here long enough. I was going to make it to say my goodbyes to her, but she survived the brainstem stroke. And throughout this caregiving journey, we've had ups and downs from hospice, home health care, just all of the things. And this is us now. We're still navigating caregiving. It's not easy. And so we're going to talk about some of the complications and stresses and challenges of caregiving. So my mother suffers from vascular dementia. We're here to talk about Alzheimer's. My mother suffers from vascular dementia. So I always thought it was Alzheimer's. Like I didn't know that dementia was the umbrella for various types of dementia, and Alzheimer's just being the predominant one. I think 60 to 80% of folks who have dementia suffer with Alzheimer's. So, there are 6 million Americans that are living with Alzheimer's. And on this picture is Melissa, who is a member of the Binti Circle. And this is her beautiful mom, Dolores. And she is one of over 11 million Americans who provide unpaid care for people living with Alzheimer's or other dementias. And so, as you can see, we save the government a lot of money with being unpaid family caregivers. But then that's where the stressors come in when we think about what it entails, what we're giving up, how our lives are shifting. And it's really a lot when you think about caregiving. So what is caregiver stress? Caregiver stress is due to the emotional and physical strain of caregiving. So when we think about stress, everybody has stress, right? So we think about eustress, which is good stress. We're interviewing for a job, we're buying a house, our kids are going away to college, all of the things, we're going on vacation. How stressful is it to pack, and prepare for vacation? Well, it's an extra layer of stress when you add in the caregiving component. Caregivers have to do a lot more in preparation for a vacation. Like a vacation, for me, it sounds good, but then I think about everything that I have to do with getting my mom, prepared before I go. And then the physical strain. We're going to talk about the different physical strains that caregiving, when you know that you've been experiencing symptoms of caregiving, the physical strain that you feel, back aches, headaches, all of those things. So this is a proportion of caregivers of people with Alzheimer's or other dementias versus the typical caregiver of older people, and the specific activities that they provide when helping with ADLs, which are the daily activities of daily living. So getting in and out of beds and chairs. Again, I'm here to share my story. My mom is immobile. And so when I get her out of the chair, transfer her out of the bed to the chair, sometimes she gets irritated. She wants to get back in the bed. I'm like, listen, lady, you need to sit up. You need to breathe. We need to make sure that you're getting air in your lungs and all of those things. But she'll fuss with me, and she's a very sweet, beautiful lady, but she cusses a lot. So sometimes I get the foul language and all of that. And so you pick your battles as caregivers. So, getting dressed is one, bathing or showering. If there are caregivers that are on the call, how many of you have to fight with getting them bathed and showered? It's like a big deal. Like my mom does not want to be bathed anymore. I told her, I see you. My mother does not want to be bathed. So I have to change the language. That's another tip for caregivers. Change the language. So I'll say, instead of, can I wash you up or give you a bath, can I wipe you down? Like, wipe you down for whatever reason sounds better than wash you up and bathe you in her mind. So I just, those kinds of things. And it's just mind boggling to me. And like I said, Atola, she's one of the Benchi Circle sisters. She says, we talk about it all the time, how they don't like water anymore for whatever reason. So, that's the level of frustration for us, because we want you to smell nice and look nice. Feeding, sometimes they don't want to eat what you prepare for them. And for my mom, she was a tube feeder for quite some time. So now she just likes pancakes all the time. And so we fuss over that, like, Ma, eat your food. And so that's another stressor for us as Alzheimer's caregivers. Getting to and from the toilet, could be a problem. And dealing with incontinence, that's something that I deal with. She is bedbound. So even last night, I had just cleaned her up. Well, I changed her brief. And then maybe 15 seconds, after I took the brief off, she said, here comes the pee. And I'm like, Ma, well, why didn't you say you had to go? So then it holds me up. It's just all of these kinds of things. And this is a safe space. This is real and raw talk. We're talking about caregivers. So we have to keep it real. And so this is some of the things that we experience as caregivers. So when we think about the health of caregivers and stress that we endure, let's consider the stats. So 1 in 4 caregivers, family caregivers, are sandwich generation caregivers, which means that they are taking care of their kids and taking care of their parents. 15% of caregivers report experiencing stress, and this is according to the CDC, experiencing stress, depression, and emotional problems at least 14 days out of a month. Now, that's 2 weeks. For women, we probably have a week that we're no good anyway, based on what we go through as women, right? PMS, menopause, all of the things. So let's think if you're a family caregiver on top of that. How do you ever have a good week? Maybe you have a couple of good days out of the month. So, I mean, these are real statistics. 70% of caregivers exhibit clinical depression at some point during their caregiving journey. And then 54% of caregivers feel guilty about taking a break from their caregiving duties to make time for themselves. That's so important. And we're going to talk about that more when I discuss being selfful. 4 in 10 family caregivers feel having respite will help, but only 14% avail themselves. And there is a number of reasons why. Partly it could be for financial. You could have financial challenges. It's very expensive for home care and respite. You may not know what to do. You may not have, if you're caring for your loved one at home, you may not have a caregiver or any relationships built that you trust to stay with your loved one for a certain period of time. And then some people just feel like they're being they feel like they're being selfish and feel guilty when they take time for themselves. And then this is a startling statistic that 10 years can be taken off of a family caregiver's life due to extreme stress. So this is the percentage of caregivers who report high to very high stress due to caregiving. So 59% emotional stress of caregiving. So like we say, just, being frustrated, angry, all of those things. The emotional side, physical side, again, feeling the backaches, the pains, the headaches, your immune system could be weakened, all those things, that your heart health, all of those things are compromised when you have this stress. So going back to the poll question, some common symptoms of stress in caregivers. So I chose movie titles that some of you may be familiar with them, some of you may not. Like I say, I think I'm dating myself because I think most of them were between the 80s and 90s, and maybe one was in the 2000s. But when we talk about Sleepless in Seattle, I think that had the most responses in terms of what you've been feeling this week. As I said, stress is universal, but it's something different about being a family caregiver, because when we are not getting our proper rest, just as individuals outside of caregiving, it may be due to work, it may be due to worrying about what you have to do, it may be due to something that you're planning. I mean, it could be a number of things. However, with caregiving, sometimes you can't get sleep because of the loved one that you're taking care of. So there's interrupted sleep. When my mom first came home, she would yell, and she still does it, because we think about sundowning, which is that they start to change, the mood starts to shift and change after in the late afternoon, early evenings. All types of behavior happens, wandering, like I say, with my mom calling me because she's bedbound. So that interrupts my sleep. It's very, very important. So like I say, that's the difference between a family caregiver not being able to get sleep and someone who isn't caregiving. Psycho. So a lot of times, anxiety, frustration, anger. There are times when I have to forgive myself for how I've reacted to some of her behaviors. It's just real. I mean, in terms of caregiving, you just never know what that emotion is going to be at any given time. The untouchables, a lot of caregivers are very isolated. And so they withdraw from community, but sometimes they're just irritable and people don't want to be around them, because they're not nice. They're always just not in a good mood, negative energy, and people don't want to deal with that. The silence of the lambs. So one thing about caregivers is that, and I've been guilty of not asking for help or support. And that's something that we need to do and really be okay with, and be transparent and honest with your community, so in your village, so that they can help. And then supersize me, poor diet, lack of exercise, that is a common symptom of stress, where we think stress is desserts backwards. So stress is dessert spelled backwards. So it's like, we go to the cookies, we go to the chips, we go to everything. We might go to the alcohol, whatever. And then, neglect ourselves, not exercise. So that's why, these are the common symptoms, but I thought that it would be fun to add the movie titles. I hope you guys enjoyed that. So what does this mean? It means that the health of caregivers is at risk. And we need to shine a spotlight on caregiving as a public health priority. It's definitely a must do. The Centers for Disease Control has indicated that caregiving is a public health priority. So what do? It's time to get selfful. And as Valerie mentioned earlier, it's that sweet spot between selfish and selfless. It's time to take care of yourself so that you can manage all of those symptoms of stress and know how to deal with them as an Alzheimer's caregiver. So selffulness defined, right? So just looking at it from the perspective of the individual. So selfish is me. It's all about me. I'm not thinking about anybody else. Selfless is when we give of ourselves to people unconditionally, whatever it is. But in caregiving, we typically do that. When my mom first came home, because like I said, I thought I was coming home to say my goodbyes to her. I did not know that she would still be here 5 years later. So when I first came home, I was coming home from Africa. I was used to fresh fruit, walking 2.5 miles each way to public transportation. And so when I came home in the hospital and sitting around, I was eating pizza. I'm back in Baltimore, eating subs and crab, whatever it was. I'm just eating it all, right? Taking it all in. And so I gained weight as soon as I came home. I was really withdrawn a little bit. I was always there for my mom 24/7. And it clicked, like, this is not sustainable, because if I'm not taking care of me, I can't take care of her. So I say being selfless is reckless. Typically in our society, we think that being selfless is a badge of honor. It's not. It's really reckless, because if you neglect yourself, there's nothing you could do for anybody else. So selfful is that sweet spot between being selfish and selfless. Do not feel guilty when you take time for yourself. And then on the flip side, don't give yourself all away. And so Julie Kyle is a PhD that actually came up with this philosophy of selffulness, but it was in a different context. But once I saw it, I was like, oh, wow, I can apply that to my caregiving journey. So the way she defines it is selffulness allows for self and connection, regard for me and for you, and for that wonderful area of new possibility, discovery, and innovation, co-creativity, where we can both get everything we want. And that's what our goal should be as family caregivers. So think about where you are on the self and other gauge. Are you selfish, more selfish, having no regard for others? Are you selfless, having no regard for self? Or are you self-full, closer to self-full, where you regard yourself and others and you're able to honor your own needs while honoring the needs of your caree or loved one? Do we have time for, how can we do this? Can we do show of hands? I don't know. But if anybody wants to just kind of share where they are or where they feel they are on this gauge, please, by all means. Anyone?
They could put a reaction in the chat.
Oh, okay, reaction.
There. Hello, can someone hear me? I unmuted. This is Hi. Can you hear
Hi.
me?
Uh-huh.
Hi, this is Etola, and I'm actually one of the Binti Circle members. Dawnita founded the Binti Circle. I am probably too often in the category of not caring enough for myself, whereas I am feeling guilty when I need to go out and do things. So I am not selfful. I'm more, I guess, selfless in some cases. It's something that I'm working on. So as a caregiver, sometimes, as she mentioned, there is that guilt complex that you feel like, I should be, I'm constantly on. So sometimes even when I go out, I'm thinking about the caregiver who's here and what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. So I say it's an area that I need to improve upon, but I'm very aware of that.
Thank you for sharing. Anyone else?
And Peggy
Hello,
has put in
can
the
someone
chat.
hear me?
Oh, yes. Is that Brianna?
Hello? Yes, it's
Yes.
me. Yes.
Mhm.
Hi, nice to meet everyone. So I just Dawnita, I want to
Yes.
pronounce your name right. Dawnita?
Dawnita, yes.
Okay. A lot of you, oh, Dawnita, sorry about that. A
Mhm.
lot of the you did a great presentation, and a lot of the things that you said reminds me, I'm a caretaker along with my mother. We take care of, it's her mother, my grandmother, she's 103 years old. And so other than like how your mother is, my grandma's the same way. Like very strong-willed, like very sweet, church-going lady, but there's times where like, she could get feisty and like, maybe she could lose track of time. And then there was that mission where it's like, yeah, we were like, wiping her down. I'll use the term wiping her down and changing her and, all that other stuff, and then back to the bedroom. So it's like those frustrating moments. So like, yeah, I'm with you with right there. And I guess I would categorize like, and I'll speak for my mom as well. I think she's on this chat as well. As myself as like selfless and selfful. It's like I'm kind of like in between, because there are times where it's like I'm definitely like selfful, like I take time out for myself, and then there are some times where it's just like, I time out for myself. It's kind of like a little bit more complicated between work and like just having to take care of, like, I don't want to say an adult baby, but it's kind of like taking care of that. It's like she's a baby, but she can articulate still like what she wants and or what she doesn't want, and that could kind of be like a little like it could be a little stressful at times. So when those times happen, and then like let's just say we have an aide, but our aide is like only on Mondays through Friday, and it the aide goes home after a certain time. Like the aide is not 24 hours because of like that's money coming out of our pocket. So I guess the term I'm looking for is like time management. Like that's when it becomes like a little bit like selfless, when I feel like I don't have that much time to do what I need to get done, because a lot of the times I spend with my grandmother and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm kind of like in the middle. Like sometimes I'm selfful and sometimes I'm selfless, depending on like the situation.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Yep. So does I have time to continue, Valerie, or? Because I know we're on time. We can end here, right?
You have like 3 more minutes.
Oh yeah. Well, you know what? Let's just end here. I have a whole lot more that I want to share in terms of tips, and I can share my slide deck with everyone. But I just want you all to make sure that you take care of yourselves so that you could better take care of your caree. There are, Rosalind Carter said that there are four kinds of people in this world. Rosalind Carter is former President Jimmy Carter's wife, and she started the Rosalind Carter Center for Caregivers, I think, family caregivers. And so she says there are four types of people in this world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. So wherever you are on the caregiving journey, be selfful, because you're going to be one of those four people at some point in time in your life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dawnita. That was wonderful to get the caregiver perspective, though we didn't have much time, but at least we learned a little. And if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat and it will be addressed during the panel discussion later. And so we'll move on to the other part of the talk, and which is from Dr. Sarah Forrester. She's a tenure-track assistant professor in the Department of Population and Quantitative Health Sciences at University of Massachusetts Chan Medical School. So her research primarily focuses on two areas. The first is understanding and preventing health inequities to improve the health of Black populations. And the second is how stress and biology work together to create health inequities in aging of Black populations. Dr. Forrester is particularly interested in inequitable social determinants of health due to structural inequalities and systemic racism's effect on cardiovascular disease outcomes, cognitive function, and overall health in later life. So welcome, Dr. Forrester.
Thank you. Let me just share my. You see that okay?
Yes.
So because of some of the stuff that Ms. Dawnita said, I get to skip a few of my slides, and so I added a few toward the end because I hadn't added them before because I didn't think I'd have time, but she went and explained dementia and stuff so well that I can just skip right through those, so thanks for that. So, she's introduced me to all this. Whoops. There we go. Okay. So I was going to start talking about definitions of dementia, but I'll just skip to the risk factors and then go on to talk about stress and social determinants and sort of putting all that together with dementia. So we'll skip that. You already heard about that. You already know about that. And you already know about that. 60 to 80%, you were exactly right on that one. So let's go through and talk more about risk factors of dementia. So there's not generally one absolute cause of dementia as a whole, right? This constellation of symptoms. There are multiple causes of the different forms of dementia and the different ways that brain changes happen based on the type of dementia that you have. They tend to break them down into modifiable risk factors and non-modifiable risk factors. So the non-modifiable risk factors, the greatest one being age, as we see that the risk of getting dementia gets increasingly higher as you age. I think of the 6.7 million that currently have dementia, 73% of those are 75 and older. So we see that how it really increases quite a bit with age. There's also genetics and family history, and the family history is actually even independent of genetics. So those are things we can't really change, right? We can't change our genetics for the most part. We can't change what happens family history-wise, and we can't change our chronological age. So what we try to focus on then is the modifiable risk factors to help, try and lower our risk a bit. So with the modifiable risk factors, it's changed throughout time, but right now there's a group of 12 that they consider to be the main modifiable risk factors. And they include low education, hypertension, hearing impairment, smoking, obesity, depression, physical inactivity, diabetes, infrequent social contact, excessive alcohol consumption, head injury, and now air pollution as well. And there was actually a study last year that looked at modifiable risk factors of dementia and found that 37% of Alzheimer's and other dementia cases were attributable to 8 of these modifiable risk factors. And the only ones that were higher were smoking and lipid levels or cholesterol levels. So based on the title of my talk, you might notice that there's one missing that doesn't seem to be on there, right? So where is stress in this? Stress is all up in this. It's like all up in the middle of all of this. It's not in and of itself listed as a modifiable risk factor. There has been some talk about why that is the case. And if it warrants being a modifiable risk factor, I'll talk about it a bit more and you can kind of decide for yourself what you think about that. Okay, so Ms. Dawnita also gave us a good sort of definition and talk about what stress is. So this is a definition from a book called Society, Stress, and Disease back in the 80s, but which is still a very good overall definition of stress. So it's a stress is the interaction between or misfit of environmental opportunities and demands and individual needs and abilities and expectations. The organism reacts with various pathogenic mechanisms. These are cognitive, emotional, behavioral, and or physiological, and under some conditions of intensity, frequency, or duration, and the presence or absence of certain interacting variables, they may lead to the precursors of disease. So I know that was a lot of words, so let's go here and sort of break down what was said there. So the first thing it talks about is opportunities and demands, environmental opportunities and demands. So that's some of the external and the internal pressures that we feel, that demand our attention, our mental space, our time. Then, it kind of talked about that sort of misfit with the demand and the expectation, and your ability to handle it. So, you have a bunch of stressors. If you're equipped to handle those stressors, the chance that, you're going to sort of have worse outcomes as far as stress goes is a little bit lower if you're able to handle that. If it becomes more than what you can handle, that's when stress becomes problematic, and sometimes you may have heard it called toxic. So obviously, wrapped up in our ability to handle it is how we react to stress. And when we talk about how stress affects us, we're not just talking about the stressor, we're also talking about our reaction to it, because that also, affects how sort of bad it will be or how much it will affect our future health. And so the way that we respond can, it can lead to protection, or it can lead to the possibility of future disease. We respond in multiple ways. Physiologically, and I'll talk about that in a moment, what that looks like. We also respond cognitively, behaviorally, emotionally, and all of these are kind of wrapped up together. And then sort of the last piece there was looking at the frequency and the intensity of the stressor. So as Dawnita was talking about with caregiving, the frequency of that is very frequent, right? It's all the time. It's your life. So that is going to be, perhaps cause more long-term stress than somebody where the frequency is, once a week they have to deal with this super stressful thing, and then the rest of the time they go on with their business. He was talking about, 3 weeks out of the month, you're, super duper stressed. That's going to be more problematic than, where it happens only a few days or something like that. And then they talked about the presence or absence of these interacting variables, and I'll talk about those in a moment as far as different stresses and social determinants talk. So what happens when you physiologically when you go through an extreme stressor or something like that, right? So I use an extreme example because I like bears and I think they're cute, but you could also think in terms of something like public speaking, if that's something that makes you really, really anxious. So say you're out on a hike and you hear a noise and you look up and you see this guy is staring at you. True story, this happened to me in Tahoe. That's where I took this picture. when I was out hiking in the morning. But he was really cute. So what you would expect to happen is your brain will perceive this as, you know, a stressor, as something terrifying because it's a bear. So what you expect to happen is your sympathetic nervous system will kick in and release these hormones to increase your heart rate, your respiration, your blood flow, get your blood flow to those big muscles and your blood pressure so that you can run away or you can fight the bear, preferably run away if you can help it. And then at the same time, it will sort of decrease these other functions like digestion that you don't really need to fight this bear. If you know the bear doesn't go away and you're still in that situation, more hormones are released, and then that stimulates even more hormones, which primarily the glucocorticoids, which primarily in the United States, in humans is cortisol. You probably hear a lot about cortisol as a stress hormone. That's the primary glucocorticoid that we get. So that stimulates, continues to stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, which continues to provide glucose to the muscles, or to the blood, adequate blood flow, and then continues to suppress the things that you don't need then, like digestion and your immune system. So this is good, right? We want this to happen if we're in a situation like this. But stop and imagine what happens if this is continually happening to you. So you're not going to continually see a bear. You're not going to see a bear every day. But say, you know, you're living in a situation where you're, you know, living in poverty. So every time a piece of mail comes or every time you get an email or a phone call, you're worried that it's something that you can't handle. It's a bill collector, or, you know, it's something that you have to pay for that you can't deal with. You may start to have the same kind of reaction that you would have to this extreme stressor often. And that becomes problematic to your body because look what happens. You have an increase in blood sugar constantly. Cortisol is associated with increase in visceral fat around the waist. You have a suppressed immune system. You have suppressed digestion. You have higher blood pressure because your body is doing this reaction constantly. So that becomes obviously problematic. So one of the ways that we sort of talk about how stress affects our health is through composite measurements. So we look at these sort of stress hormones like cortisol, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. And then we look at the biomarkers in the body that we know are affected by these stress hormones, like glucose, blood pressure, immune system markers, inflammatory markers, and stuff like that. And then we look at these sort of composites and we look to see if this marker of higher stress is associated with future outcomes. And so what we know from looking at that is that these markers of stress are associated with worse health outcomes, specifically cardiovascular disease. And for years, studies have shown also with incident dementia as well as cognitive test scores, which is associated with dementia as well. And one of the sort of big findings from this that I study as well is that we find that stress is actually prematurely aging us. So we're seeing diseases that we would see in older ages, in younger ages, in people who are more stressed out. And so can we think, if you sort of put that together, what is the implication for dementia in that case, right? So we know dementia tends to be a disease of older age. But if our bodies are aging faster than it appears that they should be on the outside, right, then it follows that we would be more likely to get these diseases earlier than we would, leading to more years living with it, as well as the other complications that come with it, like caregiving for the folks who are taking care of you. So in thinking about how that works, there's sort of indirect pathways and direct pathways for how stress sort of affects dementia. And so I'm going to talk about a few of those. So thinking about the modifiable risk factors that I talked about before, One of the large ones, or the large group of ones, is looking at cardiovascular disease. And so this encompasses a number of diseases, but some of the more common ones in terms of dementia risk are hypertension, obesity, and diabetes. And there was actually a study that looked from 52 countries, included like 11,000 people who had had a heart attack. And they looked back to see how much like stressors such as perceived chronic stress at work or at home, financial stress, life events, depression, and things like that, how much that accounted for. And they found that 30% of the risk of having a heart attack was attributable to these stressful life events, which is not trivial. We also know that interpersonal discrimination is associated with higher blood pressure. And we know that obviously higher blood pressure is associated with hypertension, which along with things like cholesterol and smoking, obesity, and diabetes are the leading cause of stroke, which falls under cerebrovascular disease, which can then lead to vascular dementia. And it's also implicated in Alzheimer's disease as well. Thinking about behavioral, Ms. Dawnita talked about that as well. So the way that we cope with stress can then sort of harm our bodies. It may help our mental health, which is what we're, basically why we're doing it. But then our physical health may end up suffering because we're doing what we can to deal with what we have to deal with. It can also make it difficult to start positive habits when you're stressed out all the time. So thinking about social contact, there are sort of different social pathways, but it can really affect our mental state and our ability to engage if we're stressed out all the time. And again, it can depend on what kind of stress, but, and I'll talk about that in a minute, actually, in the slides I added. And then thinking about depression, we know there's plenty of evidence that excess stress leads to depression and anxiety. We also know that depression is a risk factor for dementia, having higher risk of dementia. They're also very comorbid for people who actually have dementia. So some of the work that I've done is looking at, so pardon if these slides look a little different than the ones I just added, is looking at age acceleration. So it's kind of similar to what I talked about before, which was the composite measure where we look at clinical biomarkers and we see what they are in reference to what we would expect them to be for a person who is of that age in the general population. So we sort of examine those as a composite, and then we say, based on where your markers are and where we expect them to be, it seems like you are this many years older than your chronological age says you are, and that's age acceleration. So it's literally counting how many years we're sort of losing to stress. So some of the work that I did looking at that was I was looking at the social predictors. So I was looking at CESD score, which is risk of depression. And I was looking at racial differences because that's part of my interest in the research that I do, showing that as CESD score increased, particularly in the Black population, that the number of I called it weathering in this particular one, but it's the difference between your biological age and your chronological age increased, particularly for the Black participants. It started out high, but it got higher for them. We see that socioeconomic status, so how you're doing economically, as well as your education level, wealth, assets, things like that. We found that the better that was, the lower the age acceleration was, and that was very, very evident in the Black population of the sample that we looked at. And we found similarly for social participation. So how many social groups and how often they were within those social groups. And then the the other example was a paper that was done more recently that I did, looking at this biological age acceleration, and then looking to see how depression, if it changed the rate of acceleration, if you showed depressive symptoms. And so what we found was that this was over a 20-year period. By the end of that 20-year period, if you were at risk for depression, you had a certain threshold of depression symptoms, you ended up having faster age acceleration as you got older. And then the one on the right was looking at the ways that we cope with depression, with stress, and showing that more active coping was associated with a faster rate of biological age acceleration. Okay, so thinking about more direct pathways, we know like one of the major direct pathways is thinking through the stress hormones like cortisol. So we know that cortisol is associated with more inflammation, with higher glucose. Research has shown that higher cortisol levels are associated with an increased risk of cognitive decline. Even among those who are already cognitively healthy, like they don't have any decline yet, we see that there is an increased risk of cognitive decline with higher cortisol levels. For people who are already in decline, it can make decline faster. And then there's also sort of an emerging body of research that's examining the role of cortisol in deterioration of the brain areas that are of the cortex that's implicated in dementia, as well as the accumulation of some of those markers for Alzheimer's disease, like amyloid. So a few studies have looked at direct measures of stressors, chronic stressors in midlife to see if that affected the risk of dementia in older age. So basically, they found that there was an increased risk one of them found increased risk for at least one serious midlife stressor for risk of dementia in older adulthood. Another one looked at the rate of dementia and found that those who had high stress throughout midlife, and this was based on intensity and frequency of stress, had 1.35 times the rate compared to those who had low stress. And then a meta-analysis looked at, which is an analysis of a bunch of different analyses, like from cohort studies, found that there was a 73% higher risk of all-cause dementia for those who reported having had at least 2 stressful events within their lifetime compared to those who did not. Okay, so I'm gonna hurry up. So where do social determinants fall into this? If you know what social determinants of health are, you might have already put together where they fall into this, but let's delve into it a little bit. So social determinants of health are the conditions in the environment where people are born, live, work, play, worship, and age, and they affect a wide range of health functioning and quality of life outcomes and risk for quality of life outcomes. So Healthy People 2030, which is put out by the Office of Disease Prevention. They do it every 10 years. There's been a 10, 20, 30. Puts it into these sort of 5 domains or 5 buckets of where they go. So economic stability is like your employment, food security, housing instability, poverty. Education is like early childhood development and education, enrollment in higher education, finishing high school, literacy. Healthcare access and quality is exactly what it sounds like. Neighborhood and built environments includes so the actual physical environment, like pollution, the buildings, the land use, but it also includes like quality of housing, crime and violence in neighborhoods, and the sort of access to food environments that promote good health outcomes. And then the social and community context is looking at like civic participation, discrimination, incarceration, and things like social cohesion. So thinking about how these kind of all fit together, so we know education is one of the, low education is one of the modifiable risk factors that we talked about before. It's one of the risk factors that we have the strongest evidence for, of it being higher education being protective for risk of having dementia, and for later onset of dementia with higher education. We also, there's been emerging work looking at quality of education, particularly in populations where we continue to see a disparity, even though the education level is the same, looking more deeply into, the quality based on literacy. We know that more education is associated with more education and complex occupations are associated with cognitive reserve, which is basically the ability of your brain to be able to sort of find alternate ways to do things when it can't do it the way that it used to. And that's like a reserve of abilities that you've built up through your lifetime through using your brain, through education, and even outside pursuits outside of education in your job. But education can also affect your stress level, right? Because it affects your opportunities that you have. It affects the resources that you have to deal with stress, and it affects the resources that cause stress, particularly thinking about like economic conditions. So it's obviously also linked to economic determinants, that sort of bucket, but a lot of the research has looked at the two of those and tried to look at them independently and seen that there is some variation in that relationship where there's some independence of them. They're working independent of each other in some cases, although they are related. So there was one study that actually looked at life course socioeconomic status and saw that greater increments of SES was associated with a 14 to 21% decrease in the risk of dementia in the future. And then when they took education out of that and adjusted for it to see what it looked like, outside of education, there was still a 10 to 15% reduction. So there's still something kind of going on there. And, because of what I study, my thought is that it has to do with chronic stress and dysregulation of bodily systems, but have to prove that a little bit more. So we know that having chronic financial strain, having an unstable job, living in poverty, obviously heightens stress, and it heightens stress reactions, which can then bring us back to the physiological reactions that we talked about before, happening all the time and dysregulating our bodies. When we talk about neighborhoods and disadvantage, kind of, similar idea. If you're living in a place that is that has bad sidewalks, that has high crime levels, you're going to constantly be under stress. And the ways that maybe you can deal with it in a healthy way, like going for a walk or, doing healthy stress relief, doing meditation or mindfulness or something, may not be an option for you because of where it is that you live and the situation that you're in, which then sort of compounds the stress that you have already. And then in social and community, so we know that less social interaction is a risk factor for, is a modifiable risk factor for dementia. We know that it's actually more of a risk than the size of your social network or how satisfied you are with it. It's just that actual interaction. So interacting with people, being around people, we know how important like hugs are for our physiological health, our physical health. It's very similar in that respect. Okay, so sort of wrapping it up and putting it together. I don't know where I am on my time at the moment because I lost track, but hopefully I have
just 3 more minutes.
Okay, good. This is my last, most of my last slide, so we're good. Okay, so sort of putting all of this together. So we know that physiological stress and psychosocial stress are related to the risk of dementia. We've seen this through different mechanisms. We've seen this directly through stress hormones. We've seen this directly through measurement of stress and outcomes of dementia. So we know that sort of exists. we know that there are pathways that stress is clearly on to get to higher risk of dementia, including the social determinants of health. So kind of the take home thinking about this is that kind of regardless of how stress affects dementia risk, it is prematurely aging us, and it's bad for our cognitive health, as well as our cardiovascular health and pretty much all of our health. But we're here, talking about dementia and Alzheimer's. So specifically for our cognitive health. And I say regardless of the mechanism because we know that stress is bad, whichever way that it takes. But when we start to think about how can we make it better, what interventions can we do, then the mechanisms start to matter, right? Because if the issue is the overall social determinants of health, the neighborhoods that we live in, our political environment, things like that, then taking a mindfulness class is not going to solve that problem. So we sort of have to understand the level of where the stress is coming from, and how it happens and how it affects this risk in order to know the best place to intervene to keep it from happening in the future, or to reverse it if that's possible. And that's sort of why we examine these mechanisms. It's not purely academic. It's in the hopes that we can figure out a way to sort of stop it early. And so the last thing is, this article actually just came out last week in the Washington Post. Someone sent it to me, and I thought it was super interesting because it's basically exactly what we're talking about here. And it's in the Washington Post. Like, they talk about allostatic load and weathering, pretty much, the stuff that I was just referring to within popular media in the Washington Post. So I just wanted to sort of show that, so that if folks were interested, they could kind of read that. It's a really good article, and it has like graphics that are very helpful as well within the body, showing the things that are happening. So just a FYI if folks are interested in that. And
Thank you so much, Dr. Forrester, for delving into the pathways of stress and biology and what effect we have. And the issue on aging was new to me, very interesting. And so this will lead into our panel discussion, which will be moderated by Dr. Alvin Hathaway. And I'll just introduce him first. Dr. Reverend Alvin Hathaway Sr. He's now retired, but he was the 10th pastor in Union Baptist Church. Reverend Hathaway has 2 terminal degrees, including a PhD in philosophy of religion from the North Carolina College of Theology and Doctor of Ministry degree from the United Theological Seminary. He is the president and CEO of the Beloved Community Services Corporation and one of the founding principals of the African Ancestry Neuroscience Research Initiative. He's also the founder of Act Now Baltimore, a faith-based community action network. Dr. Hathaway is a contributing author to several books and publications, and he has received incredible recognition for his service and civic contributions. So I'll turn over the floor to Dr. Hathaway, who can start with his own questions or ask questions submitted by members of the audience. So we'll have about a 20-minute panel discussion. Over to you, Dr. Hathaway.
There you go. That was just a very profound, very enlightening. Both of the presentations that we had by Sister Brown and Dr. Forrester, I think, just allowed us to see the polarity of need as relates to the person who is a caregiver and a person who finds themselves affected by the disease of Alzheimer's. And so I think one of the things I know is, let me just put in the chat, because I will say to people, begin to frame and give thought to questions that could be asked during this panel discussion. But I just want to give this comment to our panelists. I had the opportunity I was the rector of a coalition of churches in Southeast Washington. And one of the things that we identified was the need for isolated elderly. And as we began to see the need for isolated elderly, we then realized that there was a need to respond to the need of caregivers. One of the first things we understood is that did caregivers understand the process of aging? Here they were having to provide care for a loved one, a family member, or some significant other, but did they themselves understand what was the aging process? The second thing that we recognized was that since they were part of a faith community, is there the opportunity to create a system of respite care? Because one of the challenges is that you are caregiving, you need to have some trusted sources that can come and give you a break as you are caregiving. So as I just thought about hearing both of these presentations, it took me back to that time and space when I found myself having the faith community kind of insert itself into this arena and area where we were seeking to be a support to not only to the caregiver, but to those that needed care. And I would just ask this question before I open it up to the audience. What else is needed, Sister Brown, as you find yourself caring for your mother?
Just as you mentioned, respite is so very important. And I think that, again, with the statistics that I shared, that most of us, 4 out of 10 caregivers think they should have respite, but only 14% avail themselves to respite. And I mentioned the factors, but one of the things that we do through the Binti Circle, the supportive network for Black daughter caregivers, is raise funds and create opportunities for respite for caregivers, along with providing scholarships. And if you don't have someone to care for your loved one. So I think that we have to do a better job within this country of knowing that respite is important. Respite could be a life or death situation for the caregiver and the care recipient, because if the caregiver, again, is not taking care of themselves, they can't take care of their loved one. So I think more support needs to come for caregivers. I know that there are the executive order, the Build Back Better, and all of that. That's for lower income families. So you have the folks that are kind of caught in the middle. They don't qualify for Medicaid, but they make too much to, they make just enough to live, but not enough to pay for the cost of healthcare. So where do we kind of meet in the middle that we're able to support everyone? Where's the money going that we're saving the country, right? Where is that the billions of dollars that we're saving, where we could provide these opportunities for more respite, more support, even from a healthcare perspective when it comes to equipment? I mean, we could talk about that all day when you think about what else is needed. There is a whole lot that is needed because the system now is broken, unfortunately, when it comes to caregiving. And to your point, isolated elders, folks want to age in place as much as they can. So who's going to bear the brunt of taking care of them? And as our population continues to grow older, we're going 2050, we're going to have more 65 and older year olds than 18-year-olds. What's going to happen? So I think that this is something that we have to definitely do within our country, is support caregivers more.
Let me continue that. Dr. Forrester, when you think about the system of care for persons with Alzheimer's, if you were to construct the best practices, what would that be?
So honestly, it would be care that starts to act on these modifiable risk factors long before Alzheimer's ever even shows up. We know that for Alzheimer's, the prodrome, it can start like 20 years before you actually start showing symptoms of Alzheimer's, right? So those, brain changes are kind of in the works through all of those years. So I think the ideal system would be to, improve basically the social and medical conditions of everybody within this country. So improve healthcare as a whole first, but sort of have also have a more, I think the term that I always think of is like a health home, where the healthcare system, the different types of doctors, social workers, the people who, you know, can help with the sort of social things and the medical things that are going on, work together within one place, and sort of create a, you know, medical or health home around that individual or around that family. That would be the ideal for me, and do that, you know, starting in like your 30s.
I hear you. I hear you. You know, it's
Yeah.
interesting. Nicole Arnold really asked the question that really kind of complements that your response. It says there are so many confounding factors that are intertwined and contribute to dementia. It seems as though a holistic approach in treatment is the best approach. How can we implement an adequate plan of care for individuals of all spectrum of dementia? So this almost kind of breaks it down and focuses it on those that are affected by dementia. What did you say to that, Dr.?
I'm sorry.
No,
I just wanted to chime in because what you were saying, Dr. Forrester, that's what the holistic, well, I mean, I'm sorry, the hospice care, that's how the hospice care system is made up, with holistic, you know, care. So there's a team that you have, the doctors, all of that, and Medicare covers that. To your point, why do we have to wait until it's end of life and not be more preventative and start to have those conversations in those care teams before we even get to that point? And a lot of people don't know that hospice is a process, is not a place. That's another thing, just educating the community. But
yeah, it's focusing on a lot of prevention rather than, so that we don't have to, the hope being that we don't then have to treat the disease, because we can sort of prevent it by working into the, before all of this happens. It's, you know, it's not really the way that our country works. We work more on, you know, solving things as they happen rather than trying to save money by preventing things. At least that's the way that it appears. But I think it would be one of the best ways to sort of help us, particularly going forward, as we know that there's going to be a number of, you know, the baby boomer population is now aging into dementia age, that there's going to be an explosion sort of. So,
you know, you almost make me smile because I once claimed baby boomer, but I think I want to change my category now. Let me ask you this. It appears that there is some research that will suggest that persons of African ancestry are more susceptible to Alzheimer's. Have you found that in your studies?
So from what I gather, as far as that goes, is that it's not so much African ancestry. So they've looked at the ApoE allele, which is the one where if you have it's a gene where if you have 2 copies of it, your risk of getting Alzheimer's is higher. If you have 1 copy, it's a little bit less. If you have none, it's lower. And again, it's not, it doesn't mean if you have it, you're going to get it. It just contributes to it. It's one of those genetic things. But there's actually been research showing that it doesn't seem to work exactly the same way in people of African ancestry, and that being that it doesn't seem to be quite as risky. So it's sort of the opposite. But now, if we're not thinking about ancestry, so African ancestry is like genetic, right?
Yeah.
But if we think about social racialization, where we're thinking about African American, or people who identify as African American or who are Black, socialized as Black within our society, then yes, we do see higher for that. And that is mainly what we see due to social factors and stress. At least in the research that I do, that's what I see. Yeah.
We got another question here. Can chronic high-level stress give rise to Alzheimer's disease, or does chronic high-level stress aggravate and steadily progress existing Alzheimer's disease? Wow.
That is an absolutely wonderful question. And I would say I can't tell you 100% if it's either or if it's a mixture of both. I think part of why we're still studying this and why we continue to for years and years and years and years is because social factors, chronic stress, and chronic diseases are messy. They're not like, with COVID, you have the SARS-CoV virus, you have COVID, the disease.
Right.
Alzheimer's isn't like that, or most chronic diseases aren't like that. So it's multifactorial, which makes it very difficult to pinpoint exactly what comes first. We can use statistical methods to try and figure it out, but none of them are perfect because people and, life is messy, diseases are messy. So my guess would be both, but I can't say 100% with 100% confidence that I'm right as far as that goes.
Let me direct this next one to you, Sister Brown. It says, what financial and psychosocial policies are currently in place to assist long-term caregivers?
I haven't, let me say this again, there are for those, and we could follow the model for those that are lower income, in terms of support for family caregivers. There are programs that are set up they're based on jurisdiction. So in the city, they have a program that pays family caregivers to care for their loved one. But again, you have to qualify for Medicaid. And they also offer support. I know what I'm talking about, Baltimore City specifically. They have a whole caregiving arm under the Department of Aging. And then around, there are organizations, Alzheimer's Association. So there are a lot of organizations that have information and support that's available for family caregivers. We're still working on, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be a member of Cohort 3 with Morgan Cares. We're working on creating culturally tailored, evidence-based research around Black daughter caregivers, specifically because research shows that there are not enough programs, resources, supports that are tailored toward our community. So I know that on a grander scale, there are supports in place. From a financial perspective, like I say, if you qualify for Medicaid, you have a little more support in terms of that financial piece with family caregivers.
This almost kind of dovetails just into your response there. Suggestions on how to handle caregiving discussions with siblings.
Oh, well, I am an only child, and when I hear the stories about caregivers with siblings, I say, well, thank you, thank you, my father. You only made one of me, that I don't have to really engage with that with anyone. But from what I've heard, I'm telling you what I heard. I'm not telling you what I know. That's one of my grandmother's, one of her famous sayings, because I don't have siblings. But again, to your point, Dr. Forrester, these conversations need to be had before something happens and they're needed. So let's have these conversations before mama can't share what she wants for herself, or daddy can't say what he wants for himself. Let's sit down at the table and have these conversations so that we all hear what the loved one wants. Now, if that hasn't happened and you find yourself in a situation where y'all didn't do that, and now all of these problems and all this is happening, I feel like that it's not a cookie cutter kind of answer or approach to it, because all families are different. So you know what? I don't even want to say, because again, I don't have any siblings, but what I can say is the one thing I think that if everybody has a conversation with the loved one, that could kind of set a foundation, at least, that, if the loved one is not talking to this one and talking to that one, telling them different stuff, and so you never know. I know that that is a very tough situation and conversation, and I'm grateful that I don't have to go
I've
through
seen
that.
I've seen two scenarios. I've seen where there were tensions among siblings that had occurred over time, were exacerbated when they had to have discussions around how they care for a loved one. I've seen that happen. Then I've also seen where, and this is personal to me because we had my sister and I had to care for our father because there was this wholesome, healthy relationship between my sister and I. When it came time to make decisions and to provide support for my father, we were able to negotiate that in a very helpful way. So that he had a good quality of life. So I think it's really, when you think about family dynamics, when you think in the terms of siblings, let's like they say, let's all of us try to get along.
Yeah.
Because when it's time to take care of a loved one, particularly a loved one that has poured so much and given so much to you, we really have to have their best interests in mind. Now here's somebody that wants to get very medical. Wait a minute. Okay. Somebody even answered that question. Somebody asked the question, are there any natural supplements that have been shown to help slow the progression of the disease? Then then Dr. Forrester came back and said, to my knowledge, most of the supplements that have been examined in trial don't show a particular benefit, but they also don't show adverse effects. But it would depend on the supplement. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah,
So
you
there's
have to look into them initially. Yeah, I wouldn't do a blanket statement for all of them, but
okay.
from the ones that I've seen.
So you would say that gin doesn't work. We can't just throw that out a whole supplement. Okay, we can't. Okay, all right. Somebody asked a question, what about beets and carrots? Oh, this is we're really getting they want to go to juicing, to vegetarianism. I mean, what is it? Is there any kind of changes we can make in diet that will help?
Yeah, I mean, a diet, full of vegetables and stuff is going to help any health condition, right? I mean, I don't know if it'll slow it, but it will certainly help your overall health, which will then help any sort of diseases that you have. So I would never say don't, eat healthily and include things like that. I wouldn't advise against it or anything. I mean, also, I'm not a physician. I'm a genealogist, so just remember that.
Well, I would just say to both of you, Dr. Forrester and to Dawnita Brown, I do want to thank you for just sharing in this round robin of conversation discussion. You have done a yeoman's job in just explaining and expressing to us the issues of stress and Alzheimer. And Sister Brown, I want to commend you for your care of your mother. And I want you to know that from my own spiritual sense, I'll continue to pray for you as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, so on that note, thank you so much, Dawnita, Dr. Forrester, and Dr. Hathaway again for this important session that we had. I learn a lot each time, things that I didn't know before, so I appreciate that. And Dawnita and I am also part of the Binti Circle because I have the sibling thing looking after my mom. But yeah, so it's an ongoing thing, and it tells me that, yeah, we have to take stress seriously and be selfful. So hopefully you'll have time to rest today and be stress-free if you can, and take it seriously. So thank you all for joining us today. And Emma will drop some relevant links in the chat about the Morgan Cares website and Johns Hopkins website, the alzheimersresearch.org, and any others mentioned during our presentations. And please expect a post-event survey from us so that we can get feedback and ideas for future events. And so thank you all again, and have a great stress-free evening.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night.
Night.